Hello, my name is Tim Shoebridge. Welcome to this video. I'm here in the centre of the City of London on the north side of the River Thames, and I'm here to test a very specific feature of this camera here, the Olympus M1 Mark III. So what is the special feature in this camera that I'm testing today? Well, it's called Handheld HiRes mode. Now, if you're not familiar with high-res mode at all, it's the ability of the camera to take multiple images and stitch them together. Each of those images has been shot by shifting the sensor very, very slightly in either a horizontal or a vertical axis. And by stitching those images together, it can create an image that's got a much higher resolution than the native resolution of the sensor. The sensor in this camera is a 20 megapixel sensor, but using handheld high-res mode, I can take images that are 50 megapixels in resolution. Okay, so how am I going to test the high-res mode, the handheld high-res mode in the M1 Mark III? Well, I've decided to test it against a camera that has 50 megapixels as its native resolution. And the camera that I've chosen for this test here is the Fuji GFX 50R. Now, I know it's not a very fair test, a medium format size sensor versus a micro four thirds, but let's see how close the Olympus camera can get to the beautiful resolution of the GFX 50R. Okay, so I'm back in my studio now. Before I show you the images on my computer and we do some side-by-side comparisons between them, I just thought I'd better mention just a couple of things about my choices of equipment when I was doing these tests. So you'll notice in the video that both of these cameras has got a prime lens on. I thought that was the best thing to do, the most comparable thing to do, because at the end of the day, I don't want lens choice or lens performance to be sort of like clouding the issue of comparing the detail and the resolution of these images. So what I've got on the Olympus here is its standard sort of like 17.5mm f1.8 lens, and on the Fujifilm I've got a 50mm lens. Now the field of view is really quite close, but it's not exact, and in fact it goes in the favour of the Fujifilm. The field of view of this lens is just a little bit narrower than the Olympus, which means I'm giving the Olympus even less of an advantage here, because it's got a wider image and it's less magnified, and I'll show you that clearly when we go through the images. In terms of aperture, I chose an aperture that would give me the best central sharpness in the image for the kinds of images that I was shooting. Obviously I needed some depth of field. These are sort of like cityscapes that I'm shooting here. So I chose f4 for the Olympus, and I chose f8 for the Fujifilm. I'm not going to be looking at any sort of edge sharpness. I'm not looking at the edges of these images at all. It's not about comparing the performance of these lenses. It's about center sharpness and center detail and resolution, and that's what we'll be looking at next. Okay, so here are the images in Lightroom that I shot on that little excursion into the city of London. And as you'll see, that they're all in sets of 3 basically, and I've color coded them as well. So in red, it's going to be the sort of like the standard definition 20 megapixel image shot in RAW on the M1iii. The yellow is going to be the handheld HiRes 50 megapixel image, and then the blue is going to be the Fujifilm GFX 50R. So as you'll see, they're all in sets of 3 like that. Now there's a variety of images here, some requiring more sort of like depth of field than others. So what I'm going to choose for our comparison here in this video is I'm going to choose these 3 here. Now, the reason why I'm choosing those is because the subject is quite flat. I mean, I've gone through all of these images and they all look really good to me. But I just want to make sure that we haven't got any sort of focus issues. I used autofocus with both cameras. I was very careful to choose the same sort of like point in the image to do my focusing with, but just sort of like rule out any focus issues, I'm going to be comparing these images here. So I'm going to go to my little quick collection where I have got those 3 images here. And I've got 2 more variations of them, and I'll cover those in a second as we go. So I think the first thing to do is to just look at and compare the handheld HiRes versus the image you'd normally get out of the Olympus camera, the 20 megapixel image. So if I take both of these images and I compare them side by side, another good reason for looking at this image is there's an awful lot of detail in these buildings here. So I'm just going to zoom in on this central part here of what is, well, a wharf building. I don't know what it is. But you'll see there immediately the difference in resolution between 20 megapixels, looking at the square here, and 50 megapixels here. It's a big, big difference. And as I said before, I'm not going to go around to the very, very edges and look at those because there's really no need to. We can spend all of our time here in the center and maybe look up at the roof there as well. But you'll see that I'm really impressed with the image quality of the Olympus RAW file that just comes straight out of the camera, the 20 megapixel RAW file. There's a lot of detail here. It looks really, really nice. Lots and lots of detail. When I look at the high-res image, and it's most noticeable when you look at things that are isolated, like these letters here, black against white, there's a softness to them. And this is actually something I've noticed with all high-res images, not just the ones shot on this EM1iii, but all high-res images tend to be soft, and really to get the best out of them you need to apply some sharpening, and I will do that a little bit later, and I'll show you the difference when you apply some sharpening. So you really shouldn't be looking at a high-res image straight out of the camera and going, oh, it's not very good. You've got to apply some sharpening to get the best out of it. But that's the 2 images compared. Clearly you're seeing everything bigger on the right hand side. Are you seeing more details? I think that you are. Certainly, if you look down here at this sort of like the edge here of with this wall, you'll hopefully see here that there is a chain that's going along, sort of like that along the wall. It's very, very difficult to see that chain here because the image is much smaller. And as we get to this section of the wall, there's a ladder here, which we can see on the right hand side. Hardly make it out at all, if I'm honest, on the left hand side on the regular 20 megapixel image. So there is more detail that you can see, but it is a soft image. So before we go any further, then let's just quickly compare that handheld HiRes image to the Fujifilm image, and I'm expecting the Fujifilm image to be a lot better. So here we go. We've got the Fujifilm image on the right and the HiRes on the left. And I hope you can see, with the resolution of this video on YouTube, I hope you can see the difference here. It is really quite substantial. If you look at these sort of interesting, I don't know, hieroglyphics or sort of patterns or whatever they are that surround these windows here in this building, you can actually see them. You can make them out. They're very, very clear here on the Fujifilm image, but on the HiRes image, they're there, but they're not very clear. But actually, before we go and look at some details, I think you need to sort of like see that there is a difference in the field of view between the two lenses that I used, and as you can see, the size of this square here is bigger than on the Olympus image. So there is some magnification there, which is obviously helping to sort of like give us some detail in the Fujifilm image. But the Fujifilm image is really, really sharp. There's so much detail. It's absolutely gorgeous. If we look here at the sort of the brickwork of what is London Bridge Hospital, on the Fujifilm image, you can actually make out the individual bricks, whereas in the HiRes image, it's kind of a bit of a blur. There's sort of like an impression of bricks, but you can't make them out individually at all. And if I go and I look up at some other details, this building hiding behind the shard here, this is Guy's Hospital. And if we look, there's railings in front of every sort of set of windows here, and they're very clear and distinct in the Fujifilm image. But actually on the Olympus HiRes, there's the impression of railings, but they're not obvious. They're soft. They're definitely very soft. If we go up to the top of the building here, where we've got some sort of building work going on, we can see some sort of up here we've got antennas and stuff on top of the roof. Very, very sharp. Loads and loads of detail here compared to this very soft image. The crane, with the sort of the cable on the crane, this little antenna here. They're there, but they're soft compared to the Fujifilm, which is absolutely gorgeous resolution. I haven't done any sharpening of this image at all. This is just what you get in terms of raw, straight out of the camera. So yeah, there's a definite and distinct advantage there to the Fujifilm. But what we should really be doing is applying some sharpening to this HiRes image and then see what we get with it. And that's what this one here, this green one, is. This is just basically just a copy of the HiRes image, and I've applied some sharpening to it and nothing more than that. And if I compare the original to the sharpened image, first of all, let's have a look at the differences between them. You'll see that the sharpening, just a little bit of sharpening, has made a huge difference. We've got a lot more definition, a lot more contrast, and a lot more detail. We can now see these individual sort of like artistic patterns around the windows. We can see very clearly the ladder here, and we can very clearly see the sort of the chains. We can see the railings, whereas before they were a little bit mushy. And if we go and look at the wording on the building, it's clear, it's sharp, whereas it wasn't before. Let's look at the railings on that hospital building here in front of these windows. Very, very soft. Just these sort of impression of railings there, but actually now we can see them in reality. So it's a lot better. I'll go up to the top of the building. Oops, there you go. Right, much sharper, much clearer rendition of all of these aerials on top of the building and the crane and the cable and everything else. Really a big difference. Definition around these windows, it's a lot better. So let's now compare our sharpened high-res image to the Fujifilm image. So these two here, Fujifilm is going to be on the left and the sharpened image is going to be on the right. Now you might say, well, this is going to be an unfair test because you haven't applied any sharpening to the Fujifilm image, but trust me, it doesn't need any. It is absolutely, what we say, tack sharp, straight out of camera. There's really nothing more you need to do to it. It's as sharp as it needs to be. So this here on the left is the Fujifilm, and this is on the right the sharpened high-res image. And it's a lot better. It's a lot more comparable. I mean, clearly the Fujifilm image is winning the day here. It really is. It's just outstandingly good. Let's look at the brickwork on the front of that hospital building. Whereas before it was mush and we couldn't actually see any real bricks in the high-res image. Now we can. I mean, they're not as good definition as the Fujifilm, but you can see them. It's a lot better. It's not, you know, it's a little bit inferior compared to a native medium format 50 megapixel sensor, but it's good. I think it's good. And if we look at railings, they're a little bit less distinct, but it's comparable. It's not comparable. There's a clear winner here, but it's much better. But, you know, that's not the point. You know, the point is not, should I buy an Olympus EM1 Mark III and use it in high-res mode, or should I go and buy a Fujifilm GFX50R? Clearly, if you have the money and you think that that's what you want to do, then obviously buying, you know, the superior camera is the right thing to do. You know, a lot of us can't afford a Fujifilm camera. We certainly can't afford the price of the lenses. Or even if we could afford them, we just don't think that it's, you know, it's money well spent. And I have the luxury of having both of these cameras, but so many times when I'm traveling, going anywhere to do some shooting, where shooting is not my primary activity, but I want to take photographs while I'm there, I just don't take the Fujifilm camera with me. I leave it behind, as much as it really is very gutting, because the bulk, the size of it, not just it, but the lenses that go with it, it's just a lot to carry. And, you know, that is the prime, you know, benefit of the Olympus Micro Four Thirds system, is they're so small and compact. The lenses are so small and compact. It's the ideal travel camera for me personally. So, you know, it's not the case of, well, which camera should I choose here? This is the scenario where you have this camera, but would you use handheld high-res, or would you just shoot natively? Okay, so it's not all good news. As anyone who is familiar with high-res shooting will be aware, motion in the image is a concern. It's a concern for any kind of composite image which is being made up of multiple exposures, whether it's focus bracketing or HDR or stitching together images for a panorama. High-res image shooting also has the same concern. If you've got significant movement in the image, where you have something that's going to be in a different position for each of those shots that are taken before they then get sort of composited together, then you're going to have some issues. So if we go back to the set of images that I took here, and we look at this one, for example, here we've got a couple of buses going across London Bridge. If I zoom in, there you'll see the issue. The buses are moving and at different positions for each of the exposures that were taken, and so you get this sort of like movement effect, a streaking effect. Now, it may or may not be a problem for you. You know, at the end of the day, it all depends on the movement what it is that's moving, where it is in the image, how small it is, as to whether it's a concern or not. I mean, the River Thames is moving quite rapidly all the time, and it seems to be fine. I mean, it looks a bit like a sort of like a long exposure. You've got some kind of motion blur going on there. If I compare this image to the shot that's just a 20 megapixel standard image, let's compare those side by side, and then we look at the water, you can see that, especially if I zoom in, that the shutter speed I used was sufficient to freeze the motion in the water. But in terms of the high-res shot, it's kind of sort of blurred together. I actually like that effect. I think it works absolutely, absolutely fine. In fact, if I'm shooting high-res on a tripod, or even actually you can get away with it handheld on the Olympus cameras, but on a tripod I would intentionally use a slow shutter speed, and then the high-res shot would exaggerate that motion even more. It can be a really interesting effect. But there's processing going on inside the Olympus camera when it comes to stacking those images on top of each other, and it's specifically looking for blur in water or in foliage, and it is, it's not giving you hard edges. It's creating an interesting motion effect. But whether or not it's acceptable for vehicles to be moving, like these buses, or not, well, that's up to you as an individual to determine that. Let's look at another example of people. I think this one here, maybe. We've got some people walking, along here. So this is another high-res shot. If I zoom in on the people, and this is definitely an issue that I see if there are any people moving in the frame. You've got this sort of like ghost outline there of where that person was for one of those exposures. Same with the lady here on the right hand side. You can see this sort of like outline. Here we've just got kind of more of a blur with these individuals moving, although this guy looks like he's got two heads. But yeah, I mean, people moving in the shot, it's a lot more of a problem than water. Water seems to be quite well handled, and foliage as well. If it's in a distance, if you've got trees moving, leaves moving, they seem to be handled very well. But if those, that foliage is quite close and you can actually see the details, then you're going to get the same issue that you have with people. You're going to get these kind of little outlines going on. So it's just it's a fact of doing high-res shooting, the same as HDR or focus stacking, or stitching for a panorama. You've got to be mindful of movement in your image and determine whether or not it's the right technique to use. Okay, conclusion time. Well, for me personally, I really do like the facility to shoot 50 megapixels handheld on this camera. Yes, it's not the same as shooting with a Fujifilm GFX 50R or 50S in my hands, but to be honest with you, there are so often that I just don't find that is practical. The camera is too big, the lenses are too big and too bulky, and most of the time when I'm traveling anywhere, it's just not an option for me, and that's sad. But this is the ideal travel camera. And so for me, the question is, do I shoot this image and take a 20 megapixel still, or do I shoot it and take a 50 megapixel still? Now, clearly, you have to be very careful about the subject that you're choosing. You have to be very mindful of any movement that's going on. Certainly if there are people there, or vehicles, or things like that, or birds. But for landscapes and cityscapes, a lot of the time you can get away with actually shooting high res, and natural movement of water and movement of foliage seems to be very well catered for in this camera. So for me, if I can, when I can, I will shoot 50 megapixels handheld rather than shoot 20 megapixels. And my philosophy behind that is really very, very simple. It's not just about printing. I don't print that often, my images. I like to print them, but I just don't print them that often. But I'm thinking to myself, I'm sitting there, I'm in front of some beautiful building. Let's say I'm looking, at the rooftops of Florence in Italy. Do I shoot 20 megapixels or do I shoot 50? I'm going to shoot 50 if I can possibly get away with it, because I just don't know what I'm going to do with that image in the future, tomorrow, next week, next year, or in 10 years' time. Having 50 megapixels just makes so much more sense to me. I might print it big, I might have a great big mural, I might sell it. Who knows what I'll do with that image in the future. I think that it's really, really worthwhile sort of future-proofing your images if you can, and shooting at the highest resolution that you can practically. You know, I look at the images that I shot on my very, very first digital cameras, which were like 3 megapixels and 5 megapixels maximum. And at the time, I thought those images were fantastic. I look at them now and they're terrible. The resolution is awful. And, you know, that's just because of technological advances. We just don't know how technology is going to move us forward in the future. So I really do think that shoot at the highest resolution that is practical for you. I think it was Ansel Adams who was always being asked what camera he used, and he would always, I think, famously respond with the same answer, and his answer was the biggest camera that I can take with me at the time or manage at the time. And that was his answer. He wasn't specific about make and model, just the biggest one. And obviously he shot film, and it was very linear, you know, the relationship between the size of the film and the detail that you can capture with that film. And you know, if he could take an 8x10 with him, he'd take an 8x10. If he could only manage a 4x5, it would be 4x5 or whatever. And I think the same applies really in general principle to digital cameras. Shoot at the highest resolution that is practical for you to do so, because you just don't know how you might want to use your images in the future. So that's it. That's my look at the M1 Mark III and its handheld high-res mode. I hope that this video has been in some way enjoyable or useful to you. Until the next one, thank you very, very much for watching.